Missing. The search for a thin, barefoot boy stumbled along Highway 16. His blonde hair matted and blowing in the early morning wind. Truck driver Calvin Williams spotted him as dawn broke, a ghost-like figure swaying against the asphalt. When he pulled over, the child collapsed into his arms, his small fingers clutching a broken toy robot, missing its left arm. His eyes, hollow from years of trauma, fixed on Calvin as he whispered 7 words that would reverberate across state lines. "My friend is still there. I escaped 5 years after 6-year-old Ethan Sullivan disappeared from a neighborhood park. He had returned, but the nightmare wasn't over." Sarah Sullivan had transformed her grief into purpose. At 43, she now worked as a trauma counselor at the Detroit Center for Missing Children, helping families navigate the same nightmare she'd lived through. The irony wasn't lost on her colleagues. She specialized in providing hope to others while her own had been stretched thin across 5 years of emptiness. Every day, she walked families through the early stages of their worst fears, her voice steady despite the echoes of her own unanswered questions. Her office walls displayed no photos of her son, not because she had forgotten him, but because she carried him elsewhere. In the small dinosaur keychain she kept with her keys, in the way she unconsciously set out to cookies with milk every evening, in how she still paused in the children's clothing section while shopping. Dr. Sullivan, as her clients called her, had earned her psychology degree 3 years after her son vanished, channeling her obsessive search for answers into professional credentials that gave her access to case files and connections to law enforcement across the country. The 2-bedroom apartment Sarah called home sat 15 miles from the old neighborhood where she'd raised Ethan. She'd moved after the 3-year mark, when hope had hardened into routine and the sympathetic glances from neighbors became unbearable. The new place had one non-negotiable feature: a porch with a light that stayed on 24/7, casting a perpetual glow visible from the street, a beacon for our son if he ever found his way back. Inside, time existed interdimensions. The living space was modern and sparse, evidence of a woman who had learned to live practically. But the second bedroom remained frozen in 2020, a small bed with dinosaur-printed sheets, shelves lined with action figures, drawings pinned neatly to a corkboard. Every week, Sarah dusted the shelves, replaced the air freshener, and changed the sheets. The door stayed closed when she had visitors. Her colleagues called her resilient. Her brother called her obsessed. The truth lay somewhere in between: a mother who had found a way to function in the world, while never accepting that her son might never come home. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, interrupting Sarah's session with the parents of a recently recovered teenager. "Dr. Sullivan, this is Detective Luis Ramirez from Columbus PD. We've got a John Doe at Riverside Methodist who was found wandering on I-70 early this morning. No ID, showing signs of extended captivity and malnourishment." Sarah had received similar calls over the years. The shared networks of missing persons databases often flagged potential matches that led nowhere. "He's got a toy with him, ma'am. A robot missing its left arm. And when we showed him pictures from the database, he pointed to your son's photo. He hasn't spoken much, but he wrote a name on a piece of paper: Ethan." Sarah's professional demeanor cracked, her clipboard clattering to the floor. "Are you certain? The DNA test is being processed. But, ma'am, he has the same birthmark on his shoulder that was in Ethan's file. And he drew your family's dog perfectly, the one from your missing person reports." The 3-hour drive to Columbus stretched like an eternity. Sarah gripped the steering wheel, her mind racing between possibilities: another false lead, a cruel coincidence, or the miracle she'd prayed for through 1,825 nights of emptiness. She'd packed nothing, stopped for nothing. At Riverside Methodist, Detective Ramirez met her in the lobby, his expression carefully neutral. "He's been through something terrible. Dr. Sullivan, whatever happens in there." Sarah cut him off. "I've counseled torture victims, detective. I know what trauma looks like. But nothing had prepared her for the boy in room 412, thin to the point of frailty, skin pale despite the summer months, hair unevenly cut close to the scalp. He sat curled in the hospital bed, eyes fixed on the window. When Sarah entered, those eyes unmistakable blue despite theirs shifted slowly to her face. Recognition dawned not in words but in the trembling of the boy's hands. He uncurled slightly, revealing the broken toy robot clutched in his palm. Sarah pulled out its matching arm from her purse, the piece she'd found under his bed after he disappeared and had carried every day since. When the two broken pieces aligned perfectly, Ethan Sullivan finally spoke his first full sentence in 5 years. "Mommy, I knew you'd find me." Marcus Jefferson wasn't supposed to care about the Sullivan case anymore. As an investigative journalist for the Detroit Chronicle, he'd covered dozens of missing person stories over his 25-year career, but something about this boy had gotten under his skin. Perhaps it was the photograph Sarah had given him, not the school portrait that appeared on missing posters, but a candid shot of Ethan building a snow fort in their backyard. His face lit up with determination. Or perhaps it was witnessing the systematic failures, as law enforcement initially classified it as a custody dispute despite evidence suggesting otherwise. Whatever the reason, Marcus had never fully abandoned the story. His series Missing in Plain Sight had evolved from covering Ethan specifically to examining how investigations into missing children were handled nationwide. The articles had won him a Pulitzer nomination and turned him into an advocate, often working pro bono with families ignored by mainstream media, now 59 and semi-retired. Marcus maintained a network of contacts across law enforcement and social services. He'd checked in with Sarah every few months for years, sometimes bringing new information, other times just offering silent companionship on difficult anniversaries. When she called him from her car on the way to Columbus, his response was immediate. "I'm already halfway there, Sarah," he said, his voice reflecting years of shared grief. "I've got a contact at Riverside Head of Psychiatric Services. She's keeping the media away for now." He paused. "Is it really him?" "It's Ethan," Sarah confirmed, her voice breaking. "But Marcus, he says his friend might still be captive. There was another boy with him." "Then we're not done," Marcus replied simply. "We won't be done until all children are home. The doctors called it selective nudism, a trauma response." Ethan spoke only to Sarah, and even then in fragments, short phrases punctuated by long silences, as though language itself had become a luxury he couldn't afford, in the hospital room that became their sanctuary. Mother and son began the painstaking process of reconnection. "Tommy likes dinosaurs too," Ethan mumbled one morning, watching Sarah arrange hospital-provided toiletries on the bedside table. "Is Tommy your friend, honey?" Sarah asked gently. "He was scared of the dark. I told him stories so he could sleep." These moments came unexpectedly, small revelations about the friend whose fate remained unknown. Ethan wouldn't talk, couldn't speak directly about what had happened to them. But he offered these sideways glimpses like breadcrumbs, tiny connections to his lost years. Physical touch remained difficult when Sarah reached for her son's hand. Ethan often flinched before forcing himself to accept the contact. The psychology training in Sarah recognized the classic patterns of childhood trauma. But the mother in her felt each withdrawal like a fresh wound. "Did you look for me?" Ethan asked on the 4th day, his eyes fixed on the window rather than his mother's face. "Every day," Sarah answered, her voice steady despite the knife twist of pain the question brought. "I never stopped. Not for one single day." Ethan nodded, processing this simple truth against whatever narratives his captor had fed him for 5 years. "He said you didn't want me anymore, that you gave me away because I was bad." He touched his short, and even hair self-consciously. "He cut my hair whenever I cried for you." Sarah fought back tears, recognizing the tactic for what it was: isolation, dependency. The systematic destruction of identity and connection. I have all your drawings, she said instead. Every birthday. I got a cake with your name. The light's been on at home since the day you disappeared. On the 7th day, Marcus brought a map. With gentle persistence, he had gained Ethan's trust, partly through his careful distance never too close, always announcing his presence before entering the room, and partly through his matter-of-fact approach to the boy's testimony. He didn't react with horror or pity, only with focused attention. We think you were taken to somewhere near water, he explained, spreading the map across the hospital tray table. From what you've described about hearing boats and feeling dampness, Ethan's hands trembled as he looked at the map of the Great Lakes region. For a moment, his expression went blank, what his doctors called dissociation, before he suddenly pointed to an area near Lake Huron. There was a blue house, he whispered, with a dock that went into the water. We could see fish sometimes. Marcus marked the location, adding it to the growing constellation of places Ethan's fragmented memory had identified. The pattern suggested movement across state lines, never staying in one location for more than a few months during the early years of captivity. And Tommy was with you until when? He asked, careful to keep his tone neutral. Until the last place. We were in the basement of a yellow house by then. Ethan's breathing quickened. Tommy found a nail and worked on the window for a long time when the man was gone. His voice dropped even lower. When he got it open, he wanted me to go first. I was scared. I said we should wait. Sarah felt her heart constricting as Ethan continued. He pushed me toward the window, but I was scared. Then we heard the car. Tommy said he'd make noise so I could run. Tears slid silently down Ethan's face. I crawled out and ran to the trees like he told me. I heard yelling, then nothing. I kept running until I found the big road. William Dexter had reinvented himself as Robert Patterson, a maintenance supervisor for a property management company overseeing vacation rentals along Lake Huron. The FBI task force located him through a combination of Ethan's testimony, financial records, and facial recognition matches from park surveillance footage preserved in the cold case files. For 3 weeks, they had monitored his movements while building their case, watching as he moved between rental properties during the off-dash season. In his modest ranch house outside Alpena, Michigan, agents found disturbing evidence. A hidden room behind a false wall in the basement, journals documenting his thoughts about children dating backers, and several items belonging to Ethan, including his backpack, shoes, and toys. What they didn't find was any concrete evidence about Tommy's fate or whereabouts. Dexter's journals became more sporadic after entries describing a problem child and necessary discipline to use after the abduction. The last mention of a second child referred cryptically to a transfer and included a Canadian phone number that investigators were now tracing. We're ready to move on him, Special Agent Diana Torres told Sarah and Marcus during their daily briefing. But we want Ethan as protected as possible. There's a safe house prepared where you'll both stay during the arrest. Sarah shook her head. He needs closure. For 5 years, this monster has been an all-powerful shadow in his mind. Ethan needs to see him as what he really is, just a man who can be stopped. Marcus agreed cautiously. Psychological closure matters as much as physical safety here, but at a distance, with full protection. Agent Torres reluctantly conceded. We'll set up a secure observation position, but at the first sign of distress, you both leave the scene immediately. From the darkened FBI surveillance van parked a quarter-mile from Dexter's house, Sarah and Ethan watched the monitors displaying feeds from the tactical team. Marcus sat beside them, his hand occasionally squeezing Sarah's shoulder in silent support. Ethan sat perfectly still, his small body pressed against his mother's side, on the center screen. Dexter returned home from his shift, pulling his truck into the garage with the ordinary movements of a man with nothing to hide. The tactical team waited until he entered the house before initiating the breach from multiple entry points. The operation happened with practiced precision. Within 90 seconds, agents had secured the property and located Dexter attempting to access a hidden compartment containing fake identification documents and cash. The lead agent's voice came through the radio. Suspect in custody, property secure. When they brought him out in handcuffs, Ethan watched the monitor intently. For the first time since his return, his voice came out clear and steady. "He's just a person." Sarah looked at the hunched figure on the screen, a balding, ordinary-looking man in his 50s, shoulders stooped. Nothing like the monster who had dominated their nightmares for 5 years. He always seemed bigger. Ethan continued, wonder in his voice, like a giant. "That's what they count on," Marcus said quietly, "making you believe they're more powerful than they really are." As Dexter was placed in the transport vehicle, Ethan suddenly pointed to the screen. "He knows where Tommy is. He's hiding something." Agent Torres, monitoring nearby, immediately radioed the arresting team. "Hold for special questioning protocol. Primary suspect may have information about a second victim. Repeat, do not transport yet." Dexter broke after 12 hours of interrogation, not from any particular technique, but from the revelation that Ethan had survived and escaped. The careful fantasy world he had constructed, one where he had complete control over his victims, crumbled when faced with the reality of Ethan's testimony. "The other boy's not dead," he finally admitted, his voice flat as he stared at the interrogation room table. "I couldn't handle both of them after the escape attempt. Too risky." What followed was a story that sent investigators scrambling across jurisdictions. After separating the boys, Dexter had transported Tommy to Thunder Bay, Ontario, where he claimed to have transferred him to associates involved in a trafficking network. He provided names, dates, and locations that matched missing pieces in Ethan's timeline. Thomas was always fighting back, Dexter said with a hint of resentment, always trying to escape. The Sullivan kid was easier to control. In the observation room, Sarah watched with Marcus and Agent Torres as Dexter drew a crude map indicating a compound near the Canadian border where the network operated. His information sparked an international law enforcement operation, with Canadian authorities preparing to raid multiple locations simultaneously. "If Tommy's there, we'll find him," Agent Torres assured Sarah. "But I need to manage expectations. It's been months since he last had contact with this network. If Tommy is alive, he may have been moved." Ethan, watching from the safe house via secure video feed, spoke directly to the agent. "He's alive. I promised I'd send help for him." He clutched his repaired toy robot. "Tommy never breaks promises." "He made me promise too." The media storm erupted within hours of Dexter's arrest. Helicopter footage of the FBI perimeter around his property played on continuous loops, while archived images of Ethan at 6 dominated split screens outside the Detroit Center for Missing Children. Reporters gathered in hopeful vigil, awaiting any news about the potential recovery of Tommy. In safe isolation, Sarah fielded carefully screened calls from family members who had never lost hope but had learned to live with uncertainty. Her brother Michael flew in from Chicago, bringing Ethan's favorite books and toys from the years he had missed. The neighborhood never forgot, Michael told Ethan, showing him memorial playground equipment established in his name at the local park. "Every year on your birthday, they release balloons in the park for Dexter." The legal consequences mounted early. Prosecutors in 3 states filed charges, from kidnapping to false imprisonment, with federal trafficking charges pending the outcome of the Canadian investigation. His first court appearance drew protesters who held signs bearing Ethan's photo and demanding maximum sentences. Marcus's coverage of the case became the definitive narrative, his years of background research providing context that other reporters lacked. His feature 5 years of silence, How We Failed Ethan Sullivan sparked renewed examination of how missing children cases were investigated nationwide. It shouldn't have taken 5 years, he wrote in his most pointed passage. It shouldn't have required this child to escape on his own, while we still search for others. The system that failed Ethan Sullivan in 2020 is the same system that fails hundreds of missing children every year. The miracle of Ethan's return should not distract us from this fundamental injustice. Reintegration began with small steps. Ethan's first trip outside the safe house of Breefork in a secured garden area left him trembling, determined to try again the next day. Physical therapy addressed years of nutritional deficiencies and confined movement. Play therapy helped him process traumatic memories through art and storytelling. The hardest adjustments were the most ordinary: sleeping in a room alone, making choices about food and clothing, using technology that had advanced during his absence. Sarah watched her son navigate these challenges with a mixture of heartbreak and pride, recognizing both the child she had lost and the survivor who had returned. "I don't remember how to be normal," Ethan confessed one evening, staring at a tablet computer Michael had given him. "Its functions overwhelming. None of us are normal after what happened," Sarah replied gently. "We're just finding a new way to be." They established routines that provided security while gradually expanding boundaries. Weekly therapy sessions, daily walks that grew longer. Baking cookies together, Sarah helped Ethan create a picture journal, sometimes drawing pictures for Tommy that expressed what he couldn't yet say aloud: his guilt at leaving his friend behind, his hope for reunion, his fear that too much time had passed. The Canadian investigation moved methodically, hampered by the months that had elapsed and the secretive nature of the network Dexter had described. Locations were raided, records seized, arrests made, but Tommy remained elusive. Each promising lead eventually revealed another layer of complexity rather than a clear path to his whereabouts. Despite the lack of immediate results, Sarah and Ethan refused to lose hope. They created a website documenting both the original disappearance and Ethan's return, featuring photos of Tommy based on Ethan's descriptions. They recorded video messages for him, hoping that somehow, somewhere, he might see them and know he wasn't forgotten. 3 months after Dexter's arrest, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A teacher working at a rural school in Ontario contacted the hotline after seeing the website. One of her new students, a quiet boy who spoke little about his past, matched the description and had drawn pictures remarkably similar to those on the website, including the same distinctive robot toy that Ethan had. "It might be nothing," Agent Torres cautioned during the update call, "but we're sending a specialized team to make contact without alarming him. If it is Tommy, we'll need to proceed with extreme care." On the anniversary of the abduction, Sarah and Ethan stood at the edge of Lake Huron, near the blue house where the boys had been held. The location, once a source of nightmares, had been transformed into a place of reclamation. They had come not to mourn, but to release the grip of the past. "I used to imagine us sailing away on a boat," Ethan said, "watching the waves catch the late afternoon light. Tommy would tell me stories about pirates who escaped from bad guys and found treasure." Sarah wrapped an arm round her son's shoulders, grateful when Ethan leaned into the contact. "He sounds like he was very brave. He told me to be brave too." Ethan smiled slightly. "He said I'd find you again if I just kept looking." "He was right about that," Sarah said softly. As twilight settled over the water, Sarah's phone rang with a Canadian number. She answered, putting it on speaker between them. "Miss Sullivan, this is Officer Westbrook from Ontario Provincial Police. I'm with the Child Services team at the school we discussed." There was a pause, some murmuring in the background. "The boy has seen a photo of Ethan." His reaction was immediate. Ethan's hand clutched his robot toy tightly. "He's asked if he can speak directly." The officer continued. He says he has a message for Robot Boy. Sarah looked at Ethan, whose eyes had grown wide. Robot Boy had been Tommy's nickname for him because of his toy collection. Please, Ethan whispered, and Sarah nodded to the officer. There was rustling. Then a new voice came through the speaker, young, hesitant, but clear. Ethan, you kept your promise. I knew you would. As the lake breeze carried away 5 years of unanswered prayers, mother and son stood at the water's edge halfway between the nightmare behind them and the reunion that waited ahead.